Delighted to be here and very proud that we've been leading the first BPN-funded project in this area. And essentially what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the early findings of this project, which we call State of the Nation. Um, the main purpose of the project, the main purpose of the project is really to look at housing performance studies that are out there in the UK, learn from them, um, develop a how-to guide to do building performance evaluation to bring that consistency that George was talking about, and then look at the future, because the future of building performance is changing. There is a new landscape. There are new opportunities, technologically driven as well, which we need to be mindful of. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we are doing, get a bit deeper into methods and tools that we've discovered. We've also designed an online survey to unlock more data sets and more studies that have happened. And I have a live link, so I'm going to invite you to complete that survey and then give you some final thoughts. So as George has said, I run the low carbon building research group in Oxford Brookes, and building performance evaluation is a core part of our research. I think we've been doing that for about 18 years now. And we must have studied over 500 buildings. And there have been various projects we've been leading, not just Innovate UK. There was a housing performance evaluation platform that we developed to share data. There is an insurance product that we had helped develop some years back, working with BLP and Wilmot Dixon. And most of that work is obviously published in different academic literature and reports and other things. So we are coming to this study from a deep knowledge base where we've been engaging with housing performance through a socio-technical approach. I'm not going to go deeper into it because George has taken has said this already. But I think the question really is, why does it matter? And I think the Committee on Climate Change report has said it very clearly that the housing that we have now and that we are building is not fit for purpose, both in terms of mitigating climate change and also adapting to it. And that is a very important point. And more important is the compliance action that has been raised, because it is clearly said in the report that what we build and what we retrofit is not as per our design intent. So unless we measure performance, we are not going to be able to manage and improve it. And I was pleased that one of our papers have actually led to some of these, because it's been highlighted in the report as well. In terms of what we are doing now, the State of the Nation project, to provide a very simple kind of a purpose for it, is to really do a kind of a critical but accessible review of studies that have happened on housing performance, try and unlock some of those available but not accessible studies, look at the objectives, the conclusions, and learn from it for other future developments and future projects. What we mean by housing performance is projects or initiatives that have measured either energy or environment conditions or feedback from occupants or fabric testing, anything which is empirically driven, I think is what we are really looking at. And we hope that this will probably help the wider building professionals as well. The project has recently started, so I'm not giving you final report. Hopefully in the next conference next year, we will be launching our report. It runs till end of the year, and as George has said, we are very grateful to all the industry partners who have funded it, and especially to Good Homes Alliance, who's a key delivery partner. So I'm not going to go through objectives, but just to remind you, the three things that we are doing here are looking at what's out there, how has that been done, who has been funding it, what can we learn from it in terms of methods, and what's the future of building performance. And I think those are the kind of 3 or 4 things that we want to look at, targeting these different audiences. In terms of why these studies have been undertaken, when you do a kind of a systematic review of what's happened, there are a variety of reasons. The primary purpose seems to be performance gap, because that's obviously picked up quite a bit in terms of the gap between design intent and actual outcomes. And studies tend to look at different aspects here. Some look at the build process and quality, because that kind of influences actual performance. Others focus on user comfort, user evaluation. There are other reasons for these studies to look at, whether homes are being built to specific standards, whatever they are. Um, and I think a key thing to remember is that innovation in the housing industry does not happen in labs. It happens in the real world. So some level of evaluation of that innovation is probably necessary, whether it's done in terms of building fabric or services or controls. Um, or to verify specific systems. There was a study done just on MVHR systems or on heat pumps, and then obviously getting feedback from residents. In terms of the scope of these studies, they tend to be divided into two bits. Some of the studies look at as-built performance, which is without occupants before people move in, and those are designed to really look at the quality of construction, the quality of the build process, in terms of building fabric performance or system performance or handover as well, communication of design intent. And the other group are looking at in-use performance. Personally, I think both are important, but in-use is really important because that's when occupants move in. So you have not just the climatic variables or the fabric or systems variables, but you have occupant variables as well. And there are studies which look at that too. In terms of who funds these, I think that's quite important because that kind of determines what's collected as data. Government departments have funded that, Innovate UK or MHCLG, BASE. They have been research funders. Our work has been funded by EPSRC and other research councils. A few charitable organizations such as Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust, Good Homes Alliance have been supporting BPE. Housing associations have been doing quite a bit, private developers, contractors as well. We've worked closely with Wilmer Dixon, for instance, and the supply chain as well. But some of these studies are not available in public domain. They have gathered data, but stay locked because probably the news is not so good. But I think that's equally important, even if it's, if it's not good news. And a range of performance metrics are used. So, you can have range of performance metrics in terms of building fabric or in terms of system performance. And it's important to have these KPIs in place to be able to compare different studies. Otherwise, you're going to be comparing apples with pears. And these are not only at as-built stage, they can also be at the in-use. So for instance, energy, which is not just per square meter, maybe per occupant as well. System performance, indoor environment, occupant satisfaction. Just to pick up on occupant satisfaction, bus surveys, developed by Adrian Lehman and now run by Arups, is becoming a de facto standard in housing. There are a lot of surveys being done, which is great because you can get a database and a benchmarking system, which is very helpful in comparing different results. And this list will increase. The talk previous to this session raised something about vapor pressure differential. So, that might be another indicator that starts coming in. When you start to look at methods now, I'm not intending to go into every method, but just to give you an overview of what methods have been typically used, and you can look at some of these costs and how much time does it take to employ these methods. At the design construction handover stage, there is a range of methods that are used from evaluating design intent to observing handover and looking at the construction quality. As building fabric assessment comes in, there are some standard methods such as blow-door test, which have been dominant because of building regs, but newer ones are coming like cube, pulse, which are non-invasive, low-cost, affordable tests as well. And as we go into performance of services and systems, there have been studies which have monitored low-carbon systems, whether they are solar PVs or solar thermal or heat pumps. Quite a few studies are now trying to look at mechanical ventilation systems as well. The recommendation here would be that rather than everybody retrofitting kit to monitor, it should probably be integrated already so that one doesn't have to go and retrofit these things which are neither cheap nor easy to do. Energy assessment has happened widely, and that ranges from just taking simple meter readings to right up to doing individual electrical appliances. So there's a whole range of the detail and precision and accuracy of information that are collected. But alongside that, studies are also looking at environmental monitoring, and there are studies now which are collecting data every minute on indoor temperature, humidity, CO2 levels, indoor pollutants, and occupancy sensors alongside to really find out the link between occupants and indoor environment. And then there are other methods being used to gather feedback from occupants. And I'm very passionate that occupants are not disregarded from this, because unless we know what occupants prefer and expect, we will never be able to answer the why question. We'll just know the what. So there are a range of methods, whether it's surveys or interviews, or something I would promote quite heavily is activity logging, where you can actually kind of cross-relate why CO2 levels went up on that day. What were occupants really doing? Did they have more guests, or the ventilation system had failed? We then looked at quite a few studies, and so far we've kind of gathered 19 studies, and I'm sure they are not comprehensive and they are not covering everything, which is why we are going to make a request that if there are other studies, then we would very much like to harness the intelligence from there. So when you try and group these studies, they are broadly these categories. Some are run by research programs, large ones like Innovate UK program that most of you will know about. There are repositories, very few, but some of them do exist, such as Low Energy Buildings Database, or the UK Energy Research Centre, or the Embed database. There are also some meta-studies. By meta-studies, I mean studies of studies. So not just looking at one case study, but doing a cross-project analysis, which tends to be more powerful because you're talking about a lot of studies rather than one. And there are few of those, one of which we've done ourselves, looking at building fabric performance. And there are a series of case studies then, starting from individual projects, where some of you obviously have been involved in. And there are others which we probably don't know about. And one of the purposes of taking on this project is to map what's out there and try and harmonize these studies in some way so we can learn from them. What we broadly found, and I think it's really interesting when you look at these 19 studies, they are available in about over 100 kind of reports and papers. They cover mixed methods, so they have qualitative, quantitative analysis. They tend to typically look at developments under 20 homes. But what's quite interesting is that in terms of the databases, the actual data that are collected, there are only 2. So despite having so many of these studies, quite a few of which are publicly funded, data are not available. There are reasons for those, obviously, about data privacy and other things. But I think we need to kind of work together to see how we can at least get some metadata, if not the raw data out of these. And that I find really an interesting finding. We've just started to do that, to really look at individual studies and see what did they cover. So were they covering design stage or construction stage or in use? How long they were carried for? And that ranges from a few months to 4 years. So some are really longitudinal studies. So where suppliers or the supply chain has questions about what is the level of degradation in building fabric, in terms of air permeability levels, there are studies out there which have been monitoring homes for over 4 years. So we should be able to kind of pick those findings up from those studies. One study which we looked at ourselves a couple of years back was through the Innovate UK program, where we looked at the domestic side of the program, and we had 188 dwelling data on design and measured air permeability. And what I've shown here is just a graph comparing the two to see whether these two are correlated. What you design and what you're getting. And the correlation is very weak. It's about 0.39. So there's clearly a performance gap. And I'm comparing like with like here. I'm just comparing air permeability with measured air permeability. But despite that performance gap, what we found was that the mean and the median measured air permeability was far better than the building regs that were in place. So building regs were recommending up to 10, and these are about 4. And there are lots of these kind of interesting findings when you start to look at meta-studies. And so what we have designed in the next phase of the project is an online survey where we are requesting people like yourselves and others who can provide access to some of these studies and data sets. So this survey, which has a live link, is divided into 2 bits, one of which is very brief, which really talks about What are your preferences in terms of housing performance? What data do you think is there? And for those which have some studies, done as part of their organizations or through academic means, there is a section 2 which has further detail. And we would like to kind of create a map at the UK level, a spatial map, which tends to show what studies have been done. We don't have that. If somebody is starting a study on housing performance, you can't go and access a single platform which will guide you to different studies that have been done. So this survey is going to be available till 15th of March. And I would request you all to access that. And this has been sent around and will be sent around as well. To complete that shouldn't take more than a few minutes. But what I want to end with are some thoughts for the future, because that's something that we are looking at as part of the project. And I think now we are in an environment where a lot of technological advancement is happening. And I'm going to give you a few takeaways from here. The first one is there is this growing use of BIM. It hasn't been there for housing projects that much, but this is probably going to happen more. And this BIM provides us a means of documentizing our design intent more carefully. And that has been an issue in many of the studies, where simply building performance evaluators do not know what was the starting point. And not just the design intent, but also the as-built performance and the in-use performance. The second thing that's changing now are these low-cost ubiquitous sensors, which some of you might have in your houses, which can now monitor indoor air quality quite a bit, and at intervals that we couldn't have done before. And in some way, we need to start to harness that data, whether it's through these low-cost sensors or through home energy management systems that are coming in, whether it's Nest or Switchy or whichever system, or Hive. There are also now low-cost, non-invasive building fabric performance tests, whether it's Pulse or whether it's Cube. There are lots of these tests coming up. There's going to be a lot of data through smart metering, sub-metering. There are, of course, issues how to kind of use that to characterize housing performance, but hopefully that should kind of develop quite rapidly. I think there are also emergence of new data streams, because buildings are no longer about using energy or generating energy. There are new forms of energy coming now, such as storing energy, sharing energy, and even trading energy. This is going to be through smart homes and smart initiatives becoming pretty dominant. There is also going to be intelligent coordination of energy systems. One of the things we haven't seen so far when these studies were done is how heat pumps talk to, for instance, solar PVs and then batteries to kind of balance supply and demand and provide demand-side response. Again, those data streams need to be harnessed. And finally, we shouldn't forget there are new means of gathering data from occupants. We just don't need to survey occupants. There are variable technologies which can give us data about the health aspects for occupants. And again, we need to kind of harness those as well, because I think all of these things will kind of change the landscape of how we do housing performance studies as we move into the future.